Welcome to Trinidad and Tobago Opposition's media briefing this Wednesday, the 29th of May, 2024, discussing issues of national importance. Today, our presenters are MP David Lee, Shadow for Energy, and MP Barry Padarath, Shadow for Public Utilities. Thank you for joining us. We will begin our press conference shortly. In the meanwhile, please share the live.
Good morning, Trinidad and Tobago, and welcome to the Opposition UNC's midweek press conference, where we will this morning dissect some of the critical issues that are affecting Trinidad and Tobago at this time. Joining me this morning is the Opposition Chief Whip, the Member of Parliament for Pointe-a-Pierre, and the Shadow Minister of Energy, Dr. David Lee. David will take us through some of the burning issues that are affecting the energy sector, but also in other spheres. So this morning, it is my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Dr. David Lee, who will take us through those areas that I've mentioned before, and then I will deal with the areas of public utilities, national security, finance, and the economy, and others. David.
Thank you, Barry. It's a pleasure to be on this morning's press conference with my colleague, my brother, MP for Princess Town, Barry Padarath. This morning, again, good morning to the listeners, viewers out there on the World Wide Web. And again, today is Wednesday, the 28th of May, and we are having our midweek opposition press conference. My short time here this morning is really to outline what is happening in the Parliament over the next coming week or two. On Monday, the 3rd of June, this government will be doing their mid-year review, starting off with the SFC, where they will be coming to Parliament and asking us as members of Parliament to give them an extra $2.3 billion for this country. So this morning I want to just go through that and dissect it a bit and how it relates to the country and how it also relates to the energy sector. So that, let me just put things in context. When Minister Imbert presented his budget for 2024 back in early October 2023, Minister Imbert said that his projected revenue was for 2024 would have been approximately $54 billion. His expenditure for 2024 is projected to be $59 billion or $59.2 billion. So what is Minister Imbert is now coming on Monday, the 3rd of June, to ask this country and to ask Parliament to approve a further $2.328 billion in expenditure towards various ministries and heads. So at the end of the day, in keeping with everything being equal, if we were to allow and give and approve a further $2.3 billion to Minister Imbert in the Ministry of Finance, actually what will happen is that his deficit would go up to somewhere to about $7 billion for 2024, and his total expenditure would be approximately just under $62 billion. And I just want to stick a pin on that number called the $62 billion. You see, Minister Imbert and his colleagues, since 2015 to now, and even some of the economic gurus out there in our country, have been chastising the PP government between 2010 to 2015, where they have bought, back in 2014, 2015, for the last budget, a budget of $62 billion. They have run riot. Minister Imbert and his colleagues have been chastising the PP government at that point in time for bringing one of the largest budgets of approximately $62 billion in the history of our country. And they said they would not do such a thing. Now the evidence is different, and that is why the contentious auditor report that was laid at the last sitting in Parliament, and if you go through that auditor's report, it will be very interesting, and I will go into it as I go along in my presentation here this morning. So that is what we are here this morning to discuss, basically that issue of the SFC that will be presented on Monday, June the 3rd, and then the debate will take place on the Friday of that week. So for the 9 consecutive years, this Minister of Finance will be using what is supposed to be a mid-year review or report to the country on the government's revenue and economic position to supplement or to add billions more from the consolidated fund for recurrent expenditure, because this government continues to provide a misleading budget figure of expenditures each year. And I will expand on that. Mid-year reviews are supposed to be a tool to present a report to the nation on how much of the budget promises of 2024 have been achieved, and supplemental emergency money in the event that there's an urgent need. That is what the mid-year review is about, that you will come and ask the country for supplemental funding because there's an urgency and there's an urgent need to meet certain things, not because of under-budgeting that this Minister of Finance has been doing year in, year out since 2015. But instead, for the entire tenure of the Minister of Finance, he has used the mid-year review to access more money from the consolidated fund because they have persistently, this government, underfunded and starved the ministries needed for routine expenditure, all in an effort to give a lower budget expenditure and a lower deficit when the budget is presented in October. And we have consistently, when we go through, after the budget is read, and we go into a process called the Standing Finance Committees for approximately 4 or 5 days, every head of expenditure that we prosecute, the opposition that is, we have always told this Minister of Finance that you are under budgeting. You are consistently under budgeting to fool this population and to fool these different chambers and economists, and maybe it is about fooling the credit rating agencies internationally so that you appear to have a lower deficit figure than is what is really happening. And you will see that in the Auditor General report that was laid at the last sitting. The Minister of Finance has announced in Parliament that he intends to use the Standing Finance Committee to approve a further $2.3 billion on June the 3rd. What does this mean for the country as the budget in 2024 is now $59.2 billion, as I said, as presented in October, and when you add the 2.3, it will go up to $61.5 billion. So what the Minister of Finance is coming to say on the next sitting is that he's keeping, if you notice, he's trying to keep that figure just under $62 billion because they have made a hue and a cry about the $62 billion that under the PP government, under the Honorable Kamala Prasad-Bissessar, that represented a $62 billion in 2014. What this means for the country is that his deficit, the Minister of Finance deficit, of 5.197 as estimated in the budget in 2024 will now climb to $7.5 billion. What this means for citizens is that yet again, Minister Imbert has suppressed the true budget figure in October to keep a misleading financial state of affairs to the rating agencies internationally, chambers in our country, and firms like Ernst & Young and the population at large. And you know, what has been happening is that there has been a deafening silence by these rating agencies, the chambers, and these accounting firms of the extra $2.3 billion that Minister Imbert is asking for. So when you go through the different reasons why he wants this extra $2.3 billion here, and I think there's a slide up on my left side that shows the different heads of expenditure that Minister Imbert is coming to ask the country to approve. So out of the 2.3, you would see a hefty figure under Ministry of Public Utilities of $527.8 million. And my colleague Barry will go into that in more detail and the reasons for that extra money under the Ministry of Public Utilities of $527 million that Minister Imbert is asking for. When you look at the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, Minister Imbert is asking for, and asking you, the country, to approve a further $570.9 million. So the two largest heads or ministries that Minister Imbert, out of the 2.3, approximately over $1 billion is coming from Ministry of Public Utilities by my colleague Barry, and myself as a shadow for energy under the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries. So I will get into that specific under the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries that is required for a further $570 million. The next biggest one after it is the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health of $495 million that Minister Imbert is coming to ask this country for. So basically that is in a nutshell of what Minister Imbert is requesting. Out of the 2.3, at least 1.5 billion is spread between three ministries: the Ministry of Energy, the Ministry of Public Utilities, and the Ministry of Health. So that there's something also interesting. Under the Ministry of Education, the allocation that the minister is asking for, out under the Ministry of Education, the minister is asking us for a further $144 million. And out of that $144 million, $20 million, the Minister of Finance is coming to ask you to allocate towards a promise that he made in his budget statement of supplying book grants of $1,000 to 65,000 needy students of primary and secondary schools. So we had raised that matter back in the SFC. When would that $1,000 be given to the parents of that to be able to purchase supplies and book grant of $1,000? We had said back in October last year, the leader of the opposition, the Honorable Kamala Prasad-Bissessa, in her budget presentation, was saying at that point in time, this is a gimmick because you did not allocate in that October budget the funding through the Ministry of Education. And once again, she has been proven to be correct, because now you see the Minister of Finance is coming to ask for $20 million to provide the supplies and book grants of $1,000. Now, they had allocated 65,000 needy students in our country. $20 million will not be the total amount that they're asking for, because it's supposed to be technically $65 million. So this is the question we are asking. Again, they are also out of that $20 million. How did you arrive? How did you come up out of that 65,000 needy students? You're now only allocating $20 million for that 1,000 supplies and book grant. Again, it is another under budgeting that is being taken as a promise today by this government under education. So let me go into my particular head. This government is asking for $570.9 million under head 40 for the Ministry of Energy, and the reason for it is they say it's a shortfall in subsidy for the sale of petroleum products. This payment is to facilitate the part payment of outstanding arrears. That's the reason that the Minister of Finance is given. That is the reason why he needs this additional money. This payment is to facilitate the part payment of outstanding arrears with regards to the subsidy for the sale of petroleum products for the period, this is interesting, for the period 2022 and 2023, owed to who? National Petroleum Marketing Company and United Independent Petroleum Marketing Company, which we know are known as UNIPET. Today we ask this government, are they jeopardizing the fuel security of our nation by not paying the fuel subsidy on time or running up arrears on the fuel subsidy in an effort in suppressing the expenditure amount and giving a misleading budget figure? As a country, we must remember something. It's alarming revelation back in December 2022 when Barry Fuel Trading, the company responsible for our fuel imports, faced severe financial difficulties due to the late payment of subsidies by this government. There's an article dated 11th December 2022 entitled Financial Trouble of Barry. And in a summary of that article, basically the chairman, who is still the chairman, Newman George, was basically pleading with the government through the Minister of Finance to release funding that is owed to Barry to be able to pay for their fuel and for the fuel security of our country. So back in the mid-year review in May 2023 last year, the government came to us in the mid-year review asking for a further $600 million to do what? To pay the arrears that Newman George, their chairman, was asking about to be able to purchase fuel for our country. So we approved that $600 million back in mid-year review in 2023. And I asked a question on the 5th of May 2023 to the Minister of Energy in the Standing Finance Committee, which we will be doing on June the 3rd. I asked him if this $600 million that you are now asking us to approve, would it clear up the backlog of all arrears in respect of fuel subsidies that is owed to Barry, UNIPET, and NP? And the question was, he said yes. He said this will clear up the backlog. And the only arrears going forward would have been in 2023 from March to the end of the year. But the question is now we are asking is that this allocation that the Minister of Finance is asking us to approve on Monday, June the 3rd of $570.9 million, and they are saying it is for arrears for fiscal 2022 and 2023. We are asking the Minister of Finance, we are asking the Minister of Energy, come clean and tell us what is the true arrears that is owed to UNIPET, NP, and Barry Fuel Trading, and do not come and hoodwink the population in that SFC on Monday, June the 3rd. We are going to hold you to task because we do not believe what you are telling this country and this population. I just want to turn a little bit to the Auditor General report that was laid at the last sitting in Parliament. And we all know the whole issue with the Auditor General report and the debacle that transpired between the Auditor General when she laid that first report back about 3 weeks ago, and Minister Imbert, as the Minister of Finance, did not lay it. Now he came at the last sitting was last Friday, and he actually laid the same report that the Auditor General presented to the Speaker of the House, to the President of the Parliament, and also to the Minister of Finance. It is the same report that Minister Imbert laid at the last sitting in Parliament. And it is my belief, when you go to the Auditor General report on page 15, it is very interesting. And I think that is the reason why the Minister of Finance really did not want to lay that report. Because page 15 of the Auditor General report states that the total expenditure for this country in 2023 fiscal would be $69.3 billion. I just want to repeat that. If you go to page 15 of the Auditor General report, she stated on page 15 that the total expenditure for this country in 2023 would be $69.3 billion. And if you look at the revenue that that the Minister of Finance is squabbling about, and what he's really trying to do is really bring down that deficit, because if all things being equal, if you maintain the revenue figure that the Auditor General is saying that she cannot, she is saying that the revenue figure is $61.8 billion. And if you take the $61.8 billion as revenue that the Auditor General is stating in her report, and you minus the total expenditure of 69.3, which is in her report on page 15, the deficit would be $7.4 billion. And I think that is what Minister Imbert, in my humble view, is trying to avoid the country really scrutinizing that deficit. Because you would have remembered back in October, when he presented his budget, there was a document called, that we all get, Barry and all of us get. It's called the Review of the Economy 2023. And when you go to that document, you see Minister Imbert say that we don't like to read. And you go to page 18 of that document. Page 18 of that document. Minister Imbert, and I just want to read, because you see this is about the credit rating agencies, it is about IMF, it is about our chambers. So I just want to read 2 lines in that document. And this Review of the Economy is really the government book and Minister Imbert's book. So I just want to read what the Review of the Economy stated. With more recent data coming to hand, following the mid-year budget reviews, total revenue and grants are now expected to amount to $53.8 million. So at that point in time, based on his book, they were projecting $53.8 billion. Actually, the Auditor General is saying it's $61.3 billion. And with total expenditure, according to here, and Imbert is expected to be $57.2 billion. And I just read out in the Auditor General report, it is actually $69 billion. And what is interesting in this statement, so Imbert is saying the overall deficit should be $3.4 billion, or 1.8% of fiscal GDP, well below the international benchmark of 3% of GDP. So in this book, if the chambers, the rating agencies are reading the Review of the Economy, what Minister Imbert has projected for them is that for 2024 would be an overall deficit of 3.4. And then you look at it, it's 1.8 of fiscal GDP, well below the international benchmark. And that is where Minister Imbert keeps fooling the population, keeps fooling the international ratings by some fancy words. But the reality is, his true deficit for 2024, again, would be around $7 billion, when you take into account the additional 2.3 that Minister Imbert is asking us to approve on June the 3rd. I just want to turn to one other matter that I want to deal with. It's called the shallow bid rounds. That again, yesterday you would have seen the country and the Minister of Energy would have had bid rounds, shallow bid rounds. It was opened yesterday, and 13 blocks were up for bids, and I think only 4 out of the 13 attracted bids from the international oil companies. So again, in our view, it's another failure. It's another failure by the Minister of Energy, and in respect of trying to attract our international companies, oil companies, to explore and drill within our waters. Because one would have remembered that this same bid rounds that Minister Imbert opened yesterday, he went on a road show. And I just want to quote an area where he went on this road show. And Minister Imbert said that he went international to try and plead with the international oil companies in trying to make them like a salesman, right? Like his prime minister went on a roadshow to attract oil companies to come and bid in these 13 shallow blocks. And it again, when you open it and 4 out of the 13 you had bids, again it's another failure. But what is also interesting is that because of the Midyear review coming up, you would see a lot of public relation pictures and stories in the energy sector with Minister Young. You know, and it is really, what he's doing is really creating his speech when he comes in the Midyear review to talk. So he will give you all the fancy things that are happening in the energy sector. But by and large, at the end of the day, nothing is happening in our energy sector in Trinidad and Tobago. It is a dismal failure by this government that they are not attracting the kind of bids and the kind of drilling that's supposed to happen in our country if they were doing the actual work. Now, one of the reasons we feel that these bids are failing is because the incentives that Minister Young and this government is putting, incentivizing, it is not attractive enough to entice the energy companies in that the appetite is not there for them to pick up, to want to bid on these 13 shallow water blocks. So you only got 4 out of the 13. To us, it is a failure. I know Minister Young has gotten certain people out there to say, well, it's not really a failure. 4 out of 13 is not bad. But if it's not bad, why did you put up all 13? All 13. All right, so that we will say much more. I will say much more at Midyear review and in our energy sector and what is happening in what is going on in our energy sector. You would see again, I would ask a question, something that I want to ask. Again, there was an article, government is negotiating ongoing potential buyer for the Petrotrin refinery. Again, we ask the question, what is really happening with that Petrotrin refinery? Is Minister Young and Prime Minister Rowley going to be waiting when it's election time close by to use it as a football, a tool to tell this country something is happening with our Petrotrin refinery? We have seen it back in 2020 for the general election. They use it as a political football tool. We saw it in the local election. They use it again. And I'm sure they will use it again when the next election is due, which is due very soon. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think in summary, I just wanted to highlight what is happening in our country as far as the Minister of Finance coming to ask for a further $2.3 billion to this country. His deficit will be about $7 billion. In 2023, his deficit, again based on the Auditor report, was over $7 billion. The highest expenditure was, based on the Auditor report, is about $69 billion, far higher than any budget that the PP government laid between 2010 and 2015. But as I close, I want to let the population know that when Mrs. Prasad-Bissessar presented a $62 billion budget, and Barry would tell you and add more, we had water, we had schools, we built schools, our road infrastructure was far superior than what it is today. We took care of the social needs of our country. We had baby grant. We had so many different grants. Even in our health sector, there wasn't any shortages of drugs in our CDAP program like what is happening now. So I ask the question before I close. Minister Imbert spent $69 billion in our country in 2023. He has not built one additional school. He has not done anything in our health sector. especially in our CVAT program. It is abysmal. There's a shortage of drugs, a shortage of basic medical supplies in our country. And the road infrastructure is horrendous. The water situation is horrendous in our country, but yet this government spent $69 billion in 2023. They are coming back on June the 3rd to ask you for a further $2.3 billion, carrying up that expenditure to close to $62 billion. And I ask you, in the last 8 or 9 months in our country, from October 24 to present, have you seen, have you feel anything that is giving you hope that this government knows how to run a country? And I say no. I say no. And so before I end and pass on to my colleague Barry, I just want to remind, there's a little article, our crude oil production fell by 8%. So everything in our energy sector, all the numbers are down. We are in some difficult times, and I hope Minister Young and Prime Minister Rowley stop playing with Maduro across on that mainland called Venezuela. So with those few words, I pass you over to my colleague, Barry Padarath. Thank you, Barry.
Thank you, David, for that very comprehensive presentation as it relates to matters affecting the Standing Finance Committee, which we will attend on Monday, as well as the energy sector. On the last occasion I spoke to you, Trinidad and Tobago, I dealt with several critical issues that are affecting the public utility sector. The very first issue I want to address this morning has to do with TSTT. On the last occasion I spoke with you, I revealed some information that came through the FOIs that the opposition UNC had filed as it relates to the cyber attack that took place on TSTT in October of 2023. Since then, we have seen another debacle take place in the Parliament, where the minister came to the Parliament when questioned by the opposition and indicated that there was no data breach, that the data of citizens of over 1 million customers of TSTT was not breached. After that, the opposition was able to expose that indeed over 1 million customers of TSTT, their data was in fact on the dark web. And the minister then backtracked and threw the blame on then CEO of TSTT, Lisa Agard, and the Chief Financial Officer, Shiva Ramnarayan. Now, where are we as a country with respect to the report that was promised in terms of the investigation that took place into how we arrived at what occurred in the cyber attack and how it was treated with during and after? The Minister of Public Utilities is on public record as giving a timeline of 1st March 2024. When further pressed on the issue by myself and others, including the union, the Communications Workers Union, the minister then shifted the goalpost to April. Again, when pressed on the matter, the minister said, well, I didn't confine it only to April, but probably May. We are at the end of May 2024, and the government remains mum on the issue of the report into the cyber attack that occurred at TSTT. In the last FOI that I filed to TSTT, asking for the board minutes of what occurred during and thereafter, the board of TSTT has been pussyfooting on this issue. They have refused to provide the information, asking for more specifics and so on, which we have provided to them. But I will ventilate that matter in another forum, but except to say that we are at the end of May. The Minister of Public Utilities treats these matters in a very ad hoc, adversarial tone when questioned. But I want to tell Minister Marvin Gonzalez this morning that no amount of obfuscating, no amount of personal attacks will change the fact that up to this time, the government has not been accountable to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago as it relates to the report on the cyber attack that emanated out of TSTT. Instead, the Minister of Public Utilities in the public space has been saying that part of the reason why we have not been able to get this report as yet is because they weren't able to put a board in place. I want to remind the Minister of Public Utilities that it is the Cabinet and the government that is responsible for putting a board to run the affairs of TSTT. It has been almost 1 month now since the names have been announced of the new board members and the chairman of that board, and yet the country is still without any cohesive, coherent response on what occurred in terms of their data being breached and 1 million subscribers having their private, confidential and personal information out there on the dark web. To the Minister of Public Utilities, I once more say to you that we will continue to probe this matter through the FOI, and we have taken a decision that should we not get those board minutes coming out of TSTT through the FOI, we are going to go to the courts of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. The leader of the opposition has indicated to me that it is time, in the absence of that report, in the absence of the information coming forward from the government, where the government continues to hide and run from the citizens on this matter, that we will now take it to the courts if necessary. So, Minister of Public Utilities, you can run, but you cannot hide. We are at the end of May, there's a board at TSTT, and you have to be accountable to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. The other major issue affecting the public utility sector has to do with the water crisis across the length and breadth of this country. And while the opposition is not ignorant to the fact of the prevailing weather conditions, we have been saying time and time again, having raised the water crisis issue, that it is not just the contents in terms of the capacity of the reservoirs and the dams, but it has to do with the management of the water sector. This morning, my colleague David Lee was reminding me that there are swaths of his own constituency in Claxton Bay that is without water for weeks. Similarly, my colleague from Couva South this morning reminded me, pleaded, can you speak on behalf of the residents of MacBean, Calcutta number 1, 2, 3, Central Park? Those areas have been without water for weeks and months as well. But it is not limited to there. It is also my colleague from Shigona's East, where just yesterday she put out a media release speaking about the challenges for water, pipe-borne water in her own constituency. I can tell you this morning, in my own constituency, constituents are up in arms. They're furious, even with members of parliament, myself and others, because a basic commodity like water, they have not had in their taps for weeks and months. But we too, the servants of the people, we are at the mercy of WASA. And right now, while there are large swaths of South and Central and East Trinidad in particular grappling with the effects of no pipe-borne water for weeks and months, we have been saying to this government, and I want to repeat that call this morning, that there are short-term measures that you can put in place to deal with the effects of what we are seeing happening right now. When we called for WASA to introduce additional contractors for water trucking services, it fell on deaf ears. I have been asking the Minister of Public Utilities that with an allocation of close to $1 billion in the last budget, why WASA still has not brought on additional water trucking suppliers to ensure that other communities that don't usually receive truck-borne water can now receive a supply of truck-borne water. We have been asking as a short-term measure why the Salcott cannot have an increased capacity in terms of water production out of these desalination plants. We have also been raising the issue of rural communities having communal tanks, that therefore if these water trucks, and we saw it a few months ago where these water trucks were complaining, the truckers were saying we cannot drive through those roads because by the time we reach there, half of the water is out on the road. It's not in the tanks because of the condition of the road. And we have been saying in these rural communities to establish communal water tanks. We have been speaking as a short-term measure in terms of additional surface water supplies. We've been speaking about drilling additional wells. These are short-term measures which also includes changing out of major dilapidated infrastructure. Time and time again at a Joint Select Committee of the Parliament, we were told of the thousands of leaks across the infrastructure of WASA. And therefore, the water production, 50% of it is lost because of these leaks that occur because of the dilapidated water conditions. And these were the areas that a People's Partnership government, a UNC-led People's Partnership government under Prime Minister Kamala Pusabi-Sessa focused on, that we were able to deliver 73% of the country with a 24/7 supply of water. Today, a Joint Select Committee of the Parliament told us in February of this year, Senator Anna Roberts and myself sitting on that committee, that 16%, and these were not words of the opposition UNC, these were words from WASA employees themselves. So this morning we are saying to the Ministry of Public Utilities and the Minister that while you attempt to engage in this very adversarial type of approach in your response, that does not change the fact that thousands of residents are without water for weeks and months in many parts of South, Central, and East Trinidad. We can name them by communities. And therefore, we are calling again for government to implement these short-term measures and tell us, have you implemented since the opposition has last called for these things? Because these are low-hanging fruits that you can deal with immediately. I want to deal with the long-term measures because I saw recently the Trinidad Guardian editorial, I believe it was the 17th of May 2024, that carried a headline that says, WASA needs year-round production plan. And it cannot be that the minister and the government throws their hands up in the air and says, well, we have a drought in the country. When we have rainy season and large parts of this country face major flooding, devastating flooding, there must be a plan for what do we do with that volume of water that is collected when we have major rainfall during the rainy season. And that is exactly what the Guardian editorial of May 17, 2024 spoke about. And it has to be a year-round plan. So while we have dealt with the short-term measures, what are the long-term measures? And I want to remind this country, the government took a loan from the International Development Bank in 2020 for $88 million. The government has that money in hand since 2020, 2021, promising this country major infrastructural changes to the water sector. They have sent a report to the Regulated Industries Commission saying that they want to send up the water rates, but they will do ABCD based on the $88 million US loan that they have received from the International Development Bank. With money in hand, the Minister of Public Utilities told us in 2020 that we will embark on 10 water modulated treatment plants. And the first one would have been established right here in Central Trinidad. The Minister promised a date of October 2021. October 21 has gone, October 22 has gone, October 23 has gone, and we are fast approaching October 2024. And not one of those water modulated treatment plants have been delivered to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And therefore, with the $88 million US loan having been secured, we asked the minister what major infrastructural work has been done. The minister, in an effort to boost their general election campaign in Moruga Tableland and in Tobago East, is now promising desalinated water. But on the same wavelength, the minister is on public record as saying that the government is going to move away and wean itself off of desalinated water. So a lot of these grandiose plans and promises are being made, but materially, in terms of how it affects getting water in your taps, none of that has actually happened. And therefore, one must ask ourselves, with that $88 million US loan having been secured and very little or no work after 9 years, what do you expect in a general election year when these promises are being made? David spoke with you earlier about the mid-year review. And one of the major components coming out of the mid-year review, and he dealt very comprehensively with exposing the lies of Minister Imbert. Time and time again, if you look at mid-year reviews that have come from previous administrations and this administration through a Patrick Manning government, the mid-year review was always used as supplemental funding, as more money that was not appropriated in the budget for major projects that were on the books, that was already in train. What the minister and the government is involved in is racketeering, because what essentially is happening is that they are presenting a budget in October of 2023, October of 2022, October of 2021, and we can go all the way up to October in 2016, where they present the budget purposely under budgeting critical areas: public utilities, works and transport, health, education, energy, in an attempt to hoodwink the population into believing that they are keeping the budget contained in terms of lower figures compared to other years. But this essentially is under budgeting. And when you under budget and you have to come for supplemental funding, one would have thought that you would tell the population on this occasion and in previous occasions that if you are asking for $2.3 billion, how it is going to improve existing projects and new projects. I want to share with you that the Standing Finance Committee documents that have been sent to members of Parliament, those of us who are responsible and take the opportunity to read and stay in the Parliament to do the work of the people that elected us to do so, you would see in those documents that under development program, and I think David alluded to it, but he did not go into detail, and I will go into detail a bit. Because when you are asking for $590 million, over half of $1 billion for the energy sector, but at the same time you are hearing that 4 out of 13 blocks interest was expressed. Then you are hearing $528 million. Again, over $500 million for WASA and public utilities. But under the heading of development program, where the major infrastructural projects, new projects, projects that will impact on the revenue, on the economy, on the livelihoods, but also on the day-to-day living in terms of public utilities, education, etc. Under the development program, you see zero has been allocated out of the $2.3 billion in most instances for the supplemental funding that is being asked for. And therefore, Trinidad and Tobago, when we ask ourselves, well, what this $2.3 billion will be used for? In the area of public utilities, $527,800,000. WASA alone will get $522,200,000. And the explanation for this expenditure is salaries and COLA, wages and COLA, overtime daily rated workers, overtime monthly paid officers, government's contribution to NIS, allowances, daily rated workers, traveling and subsistence, contract employment of $153,200,000. I will tell you why I've shared the figure for $153,200,000. Is this will take us into the next budget, but also in an election year where they will use WASA and the state resources for short-term employment to do their bidding in the general election campaign. There are two loans, and that has to do with the principal on the US $60 million RBL revolving loan of $107 million, interest on US $60 million RBL revolving loans, $57,300,000. I have just explained to you what that $522 million will be used for WASA. It does not say anything about putting water in your taps. It does not say anything about any infrastructure projects in terms of replacing dilapidated mains, in terms of additional capacity of desalinated water, drilling additional wells, looking at retention ponds for surface water in the flood that we expect because they are not dredging the rivers and ravines and so on. So essentially, it is to pay workers at WASA. I want you to throw your minds back. October Standing Finance Committee 2023. It was pandemonium in this country when I raised in the Standing Finance Committee that there was $60 million that was missing in the budget for NIS contributions for WASA employees. And that was headline news for days. And when the minister was questioned in the Standing Finance Committee, I said, Minister, does this then mean that people are going home? You are sending home WASA employees in mass. And the minister did not deny it. He said, well, there's a possibility of that. Trinidad and Tobago, I want to tell you today, when we warned this country that WASA employees were going home, but WASA employees were going home against the backdrop that there was failing infrastructure at WASA. There was no long-term plans in terms of the water sector, and there were attempts to increase the water rates while they were picking your pockets with higher property tax, higher electricity rates, etc. What we are seeing happening today is that the government handlers are telling them, do not send home the WASA employees before the general election, because you will face the political fallout from that. So today they are lapping up their own political vomit with coming to ask for $522 million to keep WASA employees there. They're holding off at this point in time with respect to the electricity and water rates. And this morning we want to ask, what is the position of the government? Because the government has said to the population that right now the Regulated Industries Commission has sent to the cabinet, and the cabinet is reviewing. So every time the media asks or the opposition asks, what is the status of the recommendations made by the Regulated Industries Commission, they keep changing the goalposts, that it is before the cabinet will be determined. We want to hear what is the government's position today as it relates to higher electricity prices and higher water prices. And they must be very clear in telegraphing to the population what is the government's position ahead of any general election. Because the proof is in the pudding. When you see $522 million, which was not allocated for in the budget because they were sending home WASA employees, but because their election handlers are telling them they will face the fallout of it, and through the supplemental funding, they are not saying, well, it will be done for mega projects to improve the water conditions in the country. It is now being used to just hold. You know, local parlance, we say, wait, Dorothy, wait. This is what is happening at WASA. Wait, Dorothy, wait. And you will see the repercussions of this after the general elections if the population takes God out of their thoughts and put back the PNM in power. So this morning, as it relates to the public utility sector, I want to raise those critical issues, and the government must answer. And if you do not answer, we will be filing the requisite FOIs, etc. And we are prepared to take you to court if you do not answer those FOIs. Dr. Munilal, on our previous platform, raised in the Auditor General's report that there is a concern coming from the Auditor General that under the Community Improvement Water Services Program, that there were 15 major water projects. And again, when you look at the breakdown, you see that it is in areas that the government is attempting to beef up their support in an attempt to win the general election. But the Auditor General is telling us that $23 million having been allocated in the financial year gone, that there is no supporting documents, there is no proof of how this money was spent. $23 million under the Community Improvement Water Services Program cannot be accounted for. And this is nothing new, because you will see much larger figures in other areas. But it is an area that we will continue to highlight and probe through FOIs and through questions in the Parliament. But while parts of South, Central, and East Trinidad, in the most parts, cannot get water, not even one day for the week, and WASA tells us, well, and when you ask the minister says, well, about scheduling. Every single community in this country can tell you that WASA does not meet and does not keep with the schedules that they post. But while that is happening, $23 million is jumping up in the air and cannot be accounted for. And the Minister of Public Utilities must break his silence on this matter that has been raised in the Auditor General report as it relates to WASA. There are a few other critical areas that we must raise as a responsible opposition, and it has to do with the fiscal measures that we expect Minister Imbert to come with in the Midyear review. And the leader of the opposition has been very frank and bold, assertive and strong on this issue of the government being broke. And we have been telling you time and time again that the government has not been able to articulate to the population how they are going to meet the shortfall. And David spoke directly about that shortfall in terms of what really is the deficit of the budget. So while Imbert comes and he tells us that in 2023 that he had a budget of $53 billion, but then you see when you add how much their borrowings are and how much his supplemental funding is coming in June, the deficit is almost in the vicinity of between $7 and $9 billion. When we actually get the figures on Monday, we'll be able to give you a concise actual figure, but it is within the purview of $7 to $9 billion. And therefore, when you add that to what was budgeted in October 2023, it takes you into the realm of over $61 billion. That is the reality. And you ask yourself, when you cannot get water in your taps, where that $61 billion has gone. And therefore, the minister must say what has occurred in WASA, in the public utility sector, and they must answer, because the Speaker of the House will confine members in the Standing Finance Committee in terms of what we can ask and what we can debate. But the ministers must come and answer how the money has been spent. And no amount of breaking from anybody inside of the parliament will prevent the opposition from raising these critical issues of where that $61 billion has been spent when you cannot get water in your taps in this country. As I said, I want to deal with the fiscal measures, where Mrs. Prasad-Bissessar has told us that this country is broke. And therefore, the Minister of Finance will articulate to the population not plans, policies, programs, projects, not foreign direct investment to bring into the country, but the minister will continue along the same borrow and tax. Unfortunately for us, we had some very good Samaritans in this country. We had some very good persons who operate in the public service, who are interested in national development, but it's very concerned about the government's policy. And it's very concerned that the fact that the government cannot raise revenue outside of borrowings and outside of taxation. And ahead of the minister's announcement of the mid-year review and the fiscal measures that will be contained in the mid-year review, I want to share some of the information that has been coming to the opposition. And we have it in black and white in terms of what the fiscal measures are. I want to first deal with the issue of VAT. The minister and the government continues to hoodwink and deceive the population. This has always been their general election strategy, a good feel that they're doing something for the population, that they're easing the burden on your pockets, when in fact, they are adding to the burden of your pockets. In 2015, when a Kamala Prasad-Bissessar administration removed VAT on over 7,000 food items, it was called They then said, playing smart with foolishness, putting back the VAT on things that affect your pockets in a real tangible way in terms of your cost of living. They then placed VAT at 12.5%, but put back VAT that 12.5% on all items that you consume on a day-to-day basis, therefore adding that additional burden on you, playing smart with foolishness. The Minister of Finance and the government plans on reintroducing VAT at 15%. That is their plan for generating revenue. Now, Trinidad and Tobago, I want you to understand this, because sometimes we are confuddled with the figures. So I'll break it down for you. Right now, VAT is at 12.5%. They reintroduced VAT of 12.5% on the 7,000 food items. I've mentioned that before. But when you bring back the VAT to the 15%, you have, and if you calculate it, with 1% alone be of VAT revenue coming in, it will amount to $520 million. And therefore, if you increase the 12.5% to 15%, you are looking at government generating revenue, taxing your pockets in one financial year of $1.5 billion. And that is their revenue generating strategy. They have no strategy in terms of increasing oil production, increasing gas production, reopening the refinery, bringing foreign direct investment. David just told you about what is happening with these bid rounds. But foreign direct investment in this country has been at the lowest it has ever been. But in 2014, under Kamala Prasad-Bissess's administration, we took it to the highest. Today, they are always accused, the UNC, of borrowing to save in the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. It is that same borrowings that they are dependent on today that they have depleted by almost $5 billion. And therefore, when the foreign reserves of this country are dropping, today we are like what, 7-8 months coverage in terms of coverage of
Foreign reserves.
Foreign reserves. When you are seeing that there's a lackluster interest in terms of foreign direct investment, you understand that it is a poor governance that has led them to this. And I want to deal with a few of the measures that they are going to come with. So I've told you about the VAT, raising it to 15%. One of the other areas is that they are looking at expenditure or earned on exempt income. So they are going to amend the tax legislation on deductions by disallowing expenditure occurred in earning income. And the government expects to receive $75 million. $75 million in revenue. And while the measure was announced in the 2023 budget, but never enacted into law, there are currently measures in the Income Tax Act that allows for expenditure in relation to exempt income to be deducted against other income. These measures in the Income Tax Act, introduced years ago, was intended to stimulate the construction industry. The current measure is not intended to affect the previous measures. There are many sources of exempt income, but CARICOM exempt income is the largest. This has been the concern of stakeholders and the accounting firm to whether this is a reversal of previous benefits. So while Mbert comes to give all that song and dance about the explanation for why they will amend the tax legislation on deductions by disallowing expenditure incurred in earning exempt income, it is going to affect your direct pockets. And again, when we talk about taxation, this is the only way, apart from borrowings, that they have found after 9 years. After 9 years, this is the only way of increasing and raising revenue. The other fiscal measure that we are aware of that will come from Mbert and the government is a new tax bracket for high-income individuals. We have said to you before, Trinidad and Tobago, that apart from introducing a new tax bracket for high-income individuals, they are also intent on bringing onto stream the hereditary tax. We spoke to you about that, about when you hereditary in terms of when you receive from family your inheritance, that this inheritance tax will be passed on to you. And you couple that with a new tax bracket for high income individuals. And the government is intent on introducing a new tax bracket of 32.5% on high income individuals whose chargeable income exceeds 2 million per annum. So on one hand, they will tax those who are in the higher income brackets. But on the other hand, while they give you the impression that they're going after those with the big income earners, it is a cover for the inheritance tax as well. And you have to juxtapose one against the other because they are both coming to you. And this is expected to raise $90 million in the next financial year. This is a new measure that the government is intent on introducing in terms of fiscal measures. The third one is a new tax bracket for commercial banks. At present, the commercial banks pay a tax rate of 35% on their chargeable profits. It is proposed to introduce a new tax system as follows. Chargeable profits up to 500 million, 35% is the present. The chargeable profits in excess of 500 million, they're going to take it to 37.5%. They're expecting to receive revenue of $86 million. So, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, this morning, essentially, when Mrs. Pasabi says to you that the country is broke, you are seeing ahead of the mid-year review, the opposition telling you exactly what they're coming with. And as I've said, we have it in the black and white. And you know, tomorrow and on Friday, the country will have a long weekend with these public holidays. And Mrs. Pasabi has been raising the issue of the Demerit system under the Ministry of Works and Transport. And public holidays and visiting public spaces have now become a nuisance. It's a nuisance now to citizens because you spend so many hours in roadblocks. You spend so many hours being charged for simple things or for things that are interpreted in a particular way by these traffic and these transport officers. But that too, we have shown from this platform, is a mechanism that the government is using to raise taxes, to raise revenue, by picking your pockets and imposing those hardships. So to those of you who are going to those public spaces over the next 2 days, that is what you can expect. I am seeing a WhatsApp going around where they're saying that the government intends on raising through the demerit point system over the next couple of months to meet the shortfall in the Ministry of Works and Transport and the TTPS. That they will utilize the demerit point system through these traffic violations and so on to raise revenue. So be very careful when you think about going to the beach and the river and so on tomorrow, that there will be massive gridlock across the length and breadth of this country because of the absence of any cohesive, coherent plan going forward to raise revenue, except for taxing and borrowing and picking your pockets and putting additional hardships. And that is the reality that we are going to see on Thursday and on Friday. And the government has found agents, and we have told you time and time again, institutions that are meant to be institutions that are independent of the government, they are now in the bosom of the PNM. They are now in the bosom of the government, that they are working with the government to ensure that these strategies of raising revenue through picking your pockets, taxation, and borrowings, that they will aid and abet in the government's effort to do so. So this morning, those were some of the issues that we wanted to raise in the critical areas of energy, the critical areas of what we can expect in the mid-year review, the critical area of water, where people are basically crying, being at the mercy of WASA. I've dealt with what are the short-term measures that we are calling on the government, We are calling what we should have seen in this supplemental funding. We should have seen more money being allocated for water trucking services. There's no mention of water trucking services. There's no mention of fixing the leaks across the length and breadth of the country. There's no mention of developing additional wells, additional retention ponds for the surface water that we expect in the flooding. There's no mention of any of that in the $2.3 billion that they are asking for. And therefore, when given the opportunity inside and outside of the parliament, stay tuned on Monday. Look at your members of parliament, the responsible ones that stay and fight for you. Look at those who ask the critical areas, Munilal in national security, David Lee in energy, Saddam Hussein in national security and legal affairs, myself in public utilities, Vandana Mohit in social services, Khadija Amin in local government, standing in the gap and fighting for answers as to why these areas have not received supplemental funding to remove the burden from your pockets and your homes. So, ladies and gentlemen, if we have any questions at this point, we will take those questions. But we've shared with you, I think, a lot of information this morning, particularly on the mid-year review, what we can expect, what we know IMBERT is coming with in terms of the fiscal measures. And let them come and say that these things are not true, because we will continue to expose their lies and expose how they continue to hoodwink the people of Trinidad and Tobago with the facts, with the figures, and not with the facts.
First question to Dr. Lee. We've had all the general reports all throughout our history. Why is this one so contentious? What do you think happened?
What the reason we think the opposition is very contentious is exactly what Barry alluded to in his presentation. It's about revenue. It's about raising revenue. If you go back to that Auditor General report that is laid, the biggest issue for IMBERT and against the Auditor General is trying to get her to reinstate the revenue figure from what was originally reported as 61. They wanted her to restate it to about $64 billion. And basically it's to reduce the deficit. They can't reduce the expenditure because that money has been gone, paid off. So what they have to play with is that revenue figure. And Barry's correct. What Barry has alluded to and has highlighted, what will be coming as fiscal measures, is about raising revenue in our country. IMBERT is not getting the revenues that he had projected. When you look at the oil and gas budgeted amounts, he has budgeted oil and gas at $5 per MMBTU, and gas figures has been consistently under $2.50 for at least 6-7 months of his fiscal year. So he's not getting those revenues as he has projected. So what he has to come and do now is to raise the tax measures that some good Samaritan informed us that will be coming. And you will see in the papers tomorrow, they will say Barry Padarath don't know what he's talking about. But let them come and tell us why we could have a document stating that. So it is about revenue. He's not getting the revenue in the country that he has projected.
Okay. MP Padarath. Why do you think there's so much issues with the water shortage across the country? Apart from the normal crises that we've been having today.
If you notice, the Minister of Public Utilities has taken a very hands-off approach on the companies within the public utility sector. And because of the failing of WASA, TSTT, and TNTech, the Minister tries to remove himself and separate himself from the board. But all three boards were appointed by the Cabinet and the government. And therefore, the direction, the policy, the leadership, most importantly, is not forthcoming. And we had some of the very same challenges that we are facing in the water sector today when we first started under the People's Partnership government. But the reason why we were able to make so many strides and so many advancements was because of the leadership in terms of getting the policy into action. So as I've said to you, having $88 million on the books for all these mega projects, but without being able to implement any of these projects, has to do with a leadership issue. It is a lack of political will to enforce these programs. So the minister continues to parrot a lot of these big grandiose plans of additional desalinated water. The minister has spoken about the 10 water modulated plants, but it's how do you get these plans going? And we have always said that the government's biggest challenge is a deficit in terms of implementation. They have an implementation deficit, and that is a critical area. The government also has a deficit as it comes to talent in the cabinet. So in terms of enforcing policy and getting the projects on stream, the deficit in terms of talent within the cabinet has been another major challenge in terms of leadership. We have been hearing for almost 3 to 4 years about the transformation of WASA. But because you are now on the cusp of a general election, government is more interested in terms of being in a holding position, allowing citizens to suffer, but coming at the tail end to say, well, we'll give you this, give you that, give you the other, but none of it ever materializes. So there's two issues there, implementation deficit in terms of the mega projects, in terms of leadership, and a lack of talent within the cabinet in terms of enforcement of projects and being able to get things going.
But if I can just add a bit to what Barry had just said, as a member of Parliament for Pointe-a-Pierre, especially in my area of Claxon Bay, and I'm sure Barry would get it, and MP Indar Singh and all our MPs, they always ask us, the shortage that is going on, why when there's an election in the air, the pipe seems to always have water. And we could never understand, that also, because a lot of our constituents are saying, but MP, why do we get only water when there's an election in the air? So, and it is unimaginable why would that happen and not happening on a consistent basis throughout the year.
And Padarath, you spoke about a 2.5 increase in VAT. We always hearing, however, about how much money the government owes the businesses and VAT refunds. Any plan you foresee for them paying these people before they increase the VAT that they will have to start paying?
The Chief Whip has been piloting and championing this issue, so I'd allow him to take that question.
Okay. Well, that in the business sector, you would have seen that Imbert would have, in one of his fiscal incentives last year and the year before in the budget, they were talking about VAT refunds and raising bonds to pay off the VAT refunds. If there is, and you pay off VAT refunds, but you always have this huge arrears. So it's a continuous basis that there are arrears. I have spoken to a lot of my colleagues in the Manufacturing Association. They are crying out for VAT refunds because their cash flow is impacted. You would have seen even paying arrears in taxes. If you're not getting your VAT refunds on time, your cash flow is hampered. So with this increase that is impending increase that we are aware of, it will just further exasperate the VAT refund issue for our business sector. So I don't see it clearing up at any point in time, because if Imbert is having a shortage of revenue, he's going to hold back on paying VAT refunds.
There's one other issue on that point I want to raise, and that has to do with the impact that it will have on the most vulnerable in our society. The government had announced an increase in the minimum wage, a minuscule increase in the minimum wage. When you bring VAT back up to 15%, and persons who have received this very minor, minuscule increase in the minimum wage, it is going to not offset that, but you're going to place an additional burden that they cannot meet that demand to pay that 15%. So you're going to see increased levels of poverty in the country. You're going to see increased levels of crime in the country. And when you think that it could not have gotten any worse, we are heading there for higher and higher figures. And that has to do with the policy of the government and how it impacts on the most vulnerable. I saw Minister Camille Robinson-Regis very disingenuous and very disappointing, but not surprising, blaming the opposition UNC for having some involvement in the levels of crime and so on, and trying to put a nexus between the UNC and crime. And therefore, when the government is actively involved in impoverishing people, actively involved in empowering gangs. What they're attempting to do with Minister Robinson Regis and others is to deflect from the real reality of how government's policy and how government's actions have empowered criminals in this country. So we totally distance ourselves from those utterances, but except to say that we understand why the minister will make that in an election year, because they are looking for some bogey to blame when it is the government who has us in this position by colluding with the gangs in this country and by impoverishing citizens to the point where some of them don't know where their next meal is coming from.
All right, as we come to a close, my colleague and myself would like to, there are two, Barry spoke about it, we have two holidays coming up this week, starting tomorrow. We have Corpus Christi and Indian Arrival. And I will do the pleasure of bringing greetings on behalf of the opposition on Corpus Christi, and I'll ask my colleague Barry to bring greetings on Indian Arrival. So on behalf of the United National Congress, on behalf of our opposition leader, the Honorable Kamala Persad-Bissessar, on behalf of my parliamentary colleagues, myself and Barry and our families, I would like to extend the warmest Corpus Christi greetings to the Roman Catholic community and the Christian community, and to all citizens of Trinidad and Tobago to have a very safe and blessed day tomorrow as we celebrate Corpus Christi. And I ask Barry to do it for Indian Arrival.
Sure. Thank you, David. This year, once more, we join with the East Indian community and the national community as a whole in expressing Indian Arrival Day greetings. This greeting comes against the backdrop of the United National Congress contribution to national development and the personalities that have provided leadership at a critical time in our country, namely the two best prime ministers we've had in this country, and that is the Honorable Kamala Persad-Bissessar and the Honorable Basil Pandey. And coming from the East Indian community, they have sacrificed a lot, but also we are reminded of the struggles, the trials, the tribulations that persons like that endured, but not limited to them. We often hear about the stories of our foreparents eating mar and rice, which is essentially water and rice with bird pepper sometimes, sleeping on pals, wearing clothes out of flour bags. That was a reality that exists for many of our communities, but particularly the East Indian community. So today, to stand on behalf of the opposition and express Indian Arrival Day greetings, I do so with a tremendous amount of pride, knowing that we stand on the shoulders of these giants like Basil Pandey, like Kamala Persad-Bissessar, and others who have provided leadership to this country, but also have revolutionized this country in many areas, particularly in the area of law, politics, education, Mrs. Persad-Bissessar, Mr. Pandey in particular, and understanding that while one community we represent at that time in terms of the East Indian community, we also lifted all of the other communities. Having come from that community, we lifted all the other communities side by side, because when we are all lifted together, that's when Trinidad and Tobago succeeds. So this morning, I want to impart best wishes. Be very careful on the nation's roads. Be careful in terms of the activities that you're involved in. Have a very safe holiday weekend, and we look forward to meeting and speaking with you on another occasion. So happy Indian Arrival to all of Trinidad and Tobago, and we thank those pioneers in the East Indian community for the contribution that you have made to the development of our beloved country. I thank you. So at this point in time, we wish to thank all of those of you who have logged on to our social media platforms, members of the media, etc., for joining us once more and for joining in the fight, because it's not just simply David and I. We always feel empowered because I think our supporters, David, understand who are the frontline members of our party, our great party, who continue to stand in the gap for them. And therefore, we will continue being those lions. We have a lioness, we have a pepper mouth, we have a cup, we have the dragon. But most importantly, we are your champion. We are championing your rights, your issues out there. So we look forward to speaking to you on another occasion. We thank you for joining us for this broadcast this morning. Thanks, David.
Thank you.
We stand united in the belief that if you empower a community, the community empowers the country.
We are the party that gave every child a secondary school education since 2001.
By building more schools in 11 years than others did in 40. We believe that no child,
Rich or poor, should be left behind.
which is why we give every Form 1 student a laptop to expand their minds and their dreams.
We are the party that put police cars back on the streets.
And gave the police a $1,000 bonus because we believe that we should support the persons who are protecting you.
We are the party that reduced the murder rate to its lowest in 14 years. We expanded GATE, stopped the property tax, and increased maternity leave.
We are the party that invested in you and your community by investing in schools, community centers, lighted parks, 24-hour health centers, and the most extensive road repair program in decades.
We believe that education is always the solution and that no one should have to pick between sending their child to school or buying food.
We are the party that works for you. We are the first responders in every situation, working to deliver a better standard of living for you and your family.
And most importantly, we have confidence in you, the people of Trinidad and Tobago. This is not a campaign, it's a movement based on building communities and strengthening families.
Come out and join us, and together we will get the nation working and moving again. Our children will once again have access to GATE and technology
We will improve healthcare.
by cutting the time it takes to see a doctor in an emergency. We will establish a senior citizen unit in every major hospital and staff the hospital with the doctors and nurses you need to create a first-class healthcare system. We will focus on creating high-paying jobs, fixing our laws to remove red tape, and ensuring that you and your family are safer. We will reduce corporate taxes to jumpstart the economy, create a special investment zone along the East-West corridor, and work with entrepreneurs to build a digital economy. This is an investment in your community to move the nation forward and get TNT working again.
Whether you are from 4th Street in Barataria to Railway Road in Dow Village, from Green Street in Tunapuna to Clark Road in Debe, from La Hokita to Moruga, from Mayaro to Scarborough, we are one people with the same dreams of a better tomorrow. And when we stand together, we win together. We are UNC and proud.
Everybody now, let's go!